With the sun slipping behind the hills, casting long shadows across the field, an uneasy silence settled over the farm. It was the kind of quiet that sent a shiver down your spine, where the rustling of leaves suddenly felt like whispers carrying news too terrible to bear. But there was only one person on that farm, a wizened farmer named Old Hank, who had weathered storms both literal and figurative. He leaned against a wooden fence, eyes squinting toward the horizon, sensing that something was off, a storm brewing that had nothing to do with the weather. As dusk deepened, Hank heard it, the low roar of distant engines cutting through the stillness of the night. A knot twisted in his stomach. The fields were usually a safe haven, a place where hard work and honest living thrived. Yet tonight, they felt vulnerable, exposed. The sound grew louder as headlights pierced the gathering darkness, illuminating the contours of the barn that had stood firmly on this land for decades, a guardian against time and change. Suddenly, Hank's heart raced. He knew that sound all too well. It was the unmistakable approach of looters, desperate people willing to destroy what others had built, driven by greed or fear or perhaps both. The barn, filled with years of painstaking labor, stood as a beacon of his life's work. They were coming for it, and he wouldn't let them take it away without a fight. The headlights flickered across the low-growing crops, revealing three figures climbing out of the cab of a battered truck. They looked like shadows against the fading light, lean but fierce, their intentions visible in the way they moved, almost like wolves stalking a sheep. Hank's jaw clenched. Did they not understand what went into every nail and beam of that barn? The hopes, the dreams, the sweat, blood, and tears. As he stood there, a decision crystallized in Hank's mind. He wasn't just fighting for the barn. He was defending the very essence of what it meant to be a farmer, a custodian of the land, a protector of tradition. Hank pushed off the fence, the gravel crunching under his boots as he grabbed his old hunting rifle, its wood warm and familiar in his hands. It wasn't loaded with bullets meant to kill. It was filled with something far more powerful: resolve. As the figures approached, they laughed too loudly for the quiet of the evening. They were carrying tools heavy with malicious intent. Hank could hear their mocking words floating through the air, painted with bravado and arrogance. "This old barn won't stand a chance against us," one shouted, his voice dripping with disdain. "Look at it, it's just a pile of rust and wood." Hank felt fire igniting in his belly. They had misread him, misjudged everything he stood for. "They think they're going to roll through here like it's an easy day at the fair," he murmured to himself, knowing it would not go that way. He stepped out from behind the fence, rifle raised, his voice steady and fierce. The laughter turned to confusion, then to anger as they realized he wasn't backing down. The moonlight caught the determination etched on his weathered face. It was as if the land itself had imbued him with strength, a legacy of generations before him coursing through his veins. They were 3 against 1, but they hadn't counted on the fierceness of a man defending his home. The leader sneered, taking a step forward. His bravado wavered just a fraction as he caught Hank's unwavering gaze. And there it was, the heartbeat of this land echoing in the courage of an old man, the pulse of the years spent tilling soil, planting seeds, and raising livestock. Hank raised the rifle, not intending to shoot, but to defend, to intimidate. He would not let them take away the fruits of his labor, not without a fight. The looters shared a glance, uncertainty creeping into their minds like the night sky creeping into the day. The fear of facing an old man with a rifle for a heart was palpable. It was the unspoken bond between the farmer and his land. Maybe they had underestimated him, or worse, underestimated the value of what he defended. "Back the hell off," Hank bellowed, his voice rumbling like thunder. The air crackled, a tension so thick you could cut it with a knife. The leader hesitated, fists clenching, as he processed both Hank's resolve and the futility of challenging that fierce spirit. It's strange, isn't it? How in moments of collective chaos, some find their strength while others cower in uncertainty. Those looters were probably just trying to survive, but so was Hank, and he wouldn't go down without reminding them of what it meant to fight for something greater than oneself. The leader lunged forward, driven by desperation. A surge of adrenaline shot through Hank, age faded into the background. He aimed his rifle into the air, firing a shot that rang out like a clarion call. The bullet sliced through the night, shocking them back into a grim realization of the situation. The sound echoed, and in that moment, nature itself seemed to hold its breath, the crickets and night creatures silenced by the weight of the threat. "Let me make myself clear. You touch this barn and I will make you regret it," Hank spat, his voice a low growl filled with the ferocity of a man who had given everything just to stand on this land. The tension was a living thing, quaking between the men. The looters, now rooted in disbelief, glanced at each other, their bravado crumbling like dry earth underfoot. Hank stood firm, every inch of him a monument to resilience. The dark silhouettes contemplated retreat, realizing that not all battles could be won by sheer numbers. In that moment, defiance met fear, a collision of wills that illuminated their options. The whispers of survival hung heavy in the air. Perhaps they were once brothers in hardship, but now they stood as adversaries, one nurtured by sacrifice, the other fueled by desperation. "Come on, boys," the leader finally muttered, wildly waving his hand in a gesture of retreat. Old Hank watched as they backed away, the tension in the air slowly ebbing. With every step they took toward their truck, his heart began to unclench, releasing the tight grip of anxiety. They stumbled in their haste, compounded by undermined bravado. The truck revved angrily to life, tires spitting gravel as they sped away, their figures lost in the horizon. Hank lowered his rifle, feeling a mix of emotions swell through him. The battle wasn't just fought in the moments of courage, it was fought in silence, each decision echoing across time. He hadn't just defended a barn, he had protected a legacy, standing as a human bulwark against chaos that threatened to overtake all that was loved. Under the cloak of night, Old Hank took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs. As the moon emerged in full view, illuminating the fields and the old barn standing tall, he felt the weight of solitude settle gently upon his shoulders. It wasn't the first time he had faced danger tooth to nail, defending his life's calling. But perhaps tonight's struggle cemented a lesson he'd lived by. All his life courage doesn't appear in grand gestures alone. Sometimes, it's just the quiet grit of one lonely man against whatever darkness comes his way. With the stars flickering life above him, Hank walked back to his beloved barn, feeling the solid wood of its walls resonate with purpose. Each creak sounded a familiar tune, a song of survival and resilience. He was not a man of many luxuries, but the barn and the land were his treasures, a testament to a hardworking spirit. As he leaned against the barn door, he thought about life, about strife, how moments woven together created the fabric of existence. He knew one thing for certain: no one would take this away from him. He would watch the sun rise again over this land, ready to face whatever challenges came tomorrow. For Hank, tomorrow was not just another day. It was another chance to stand tall. With the serenity of the night washing over him, he whispered words of gratitude into the open air, thankful for the protection he had fought for, thankful for the legacy passed down to him. And he understood deeply that courage was not a genetic gift, but a choice one he had made tonight. In the stillness of twilight, something was stirring in the fields. Hank, a seasoned farmer, leaned against the worn wooden fence that bordered his property, the smell of fresh earth and late summer blooms mingling in the air. For decades, this land had been his refuge, where he toiled day after day, nurturing crops and caring for animals. But tonight, beneath the dimming sky, an unsettling dread prickled at the back of his mind. As darkness settled in, the ominous rumble of engines broke the quiet. Hank squinted toward the horizon, headlights cut through the twilight, bouncing off the barn like wayward stars. His heart dropped. They were coming for him. It was unmistakable. The looters, the desperate figures who roamed the outskirts of decaying towns, searching for easy targets. 3 rugged shapes emerged from a rusty truck, their silhouettes casting long shadows over the land. They advanced through the rows of corn, laughter mingling with the wind, a sound that twisted in Hank's stomach. "Look at this old place," one of them taunted, a snarling grin plastered across his face. Every callous word ignited a fire in Hank's chest. This barn wasn't just a structure, it was the heart of his life's work, filled with harvested grain, memories, and dreams realized through sweat and struggle. He had cultivated these fields for years, planting seeds with his own hands, savoring every drop of rain and sun that fell upon them. As the men approached, now within earshot, Hank felt an overwhelming urge to protect what was his. He pushed off from the fence, his boots crunching against the gravel as he retraced his steps to the barn. He kept his movements low, heart pounding like a war drum, anger and determination coursing through his veins. If they thought they could seize the fruits of his labor without consequence, they were gravely mistaken. His fingers brushed the familiar contours of the old hunting rifle hanging by the barn door, a relic from many seasons past. But in this moment, it felt like an extension of himself. He wouldn't shoot to kill. He aimed to intimidate, to defend his sanctuary with the ferocity of a bear protecting its cubs. The rifle was more than just a weapon. It was the spirit of survival that inspired generations of farmers. The intruders neared, overtaking their earlier bravado. One jeered, chuckling as they approached the barn's entrance. Each laugh fell flat against Hank's growing resolve. He stepped into view, his silhouette framed by the light spilling from the barn's open door, an immovable object rooted in love for his land. Hank's voice boomed, deep and unwavering, vibrating with centuries of agricultural ancestry. The men halted, surprise blanketing their faces. For all their bravado, they hadn't expected confrontation. The leader, a scrawny figure brimming with false confidence, took a half step back but quickly regained composure. "Look, old man, we don't want any trouble. Just a little feed, maybe some tools," he sneered, but there was tremor in his voice, a crack beneath the surface of bravado. "Not a chance," Hank growled, raising the rifle, aiming it skyward. The shot rang out, loud and reverberating. The sound echoed across the quiet fields like a clap of thunder, slicing through the evening air. It startled every creature on the farm, sending crows up into the sky, flapping and yelling in chaos. The looters froze, eyes wide, hearts racing. In their mind, the farmer became a titan defending his territory. With every heartbeat, they reevaluated their plan, the stakes rising higher than the summer sun. For a moment, uncertainty rippled between the four men, reality crashing against their reckless intentions. "Let's not do anything stupid," one of the looters said, attempting to rally his companions. Hank wasn't backing down. The anger that had simmered now erupted into a steady chill. "You don't understand what you're getting into. This barn represents years of my life sacrifice, care, and love." The leader moved back, shifting uneasily, glancing at his friends as if seeking an escape route. The grip on their weapons tightened, but Hank drew courage from the darkening sky. He wasn't just a man, he was the embodiment of the farm. Every furrow in his skin told a story, every gray strand in his hair whispered of storms weathered and battles fought. "Let's just be smart about this," he continued, lowering his voice. "You're faced with a decision. Leave now and you'll make it home." Though Hank's heart raced, he found clarity among the chaos. It was a primal power fueled by the very earth he stood upon. The looters, facing not just an old man but a formidable will, floundered. One of them shifted nervously, eyes darting between his leader and the barn. Tension surged like a river threatening to overflow its banks. "You may think you're invincible, but every time you take what's not yours, you sow the seeds of your own downfall," Hank said, channeling a wisdom birthed from years of toil. His words cut deeper than the bullet that had fired earlier, striking a chord of fear mingled with respect. Real-life experience had taught him that bravado could falter in the face of true dedication and loyalty. He could see doubt infiltrating the eyes of the intruders, their haphazard bravado flickering like a candle in the wind. The leader barked, frustration bleeding through the edges of his command. He turned to flee, and the others followed suit, stepping backward toward their getaway. But with every inch they took back, Hank took a step forward, making sure they understood the consequences of their actions. As they reached their vehicle, Hank shouted, "You think it's about feeding yourselves with someone else's toil? You're better than that." Little did they know, in that moment, Hank wasn't merely defending a barn. He was standing firm against a tide of disillusionment and despair, challenging the very morals that had brought them here. The world had been cruel, and yet Hank was using his voice to hold them accountable, reaching for their humanity. The throaty roar of the engine filled the air as the looters rushed into their truck. Tires spun angrily against gravel, but Hank stood steadfast, rifle aimed, heart pounding. He watched them disappear into the night, their headlights casting uncertain shadows against the backdrop of his cherished land. Silence enveloped him. He could hear the distant chirp of crickets returning, an orchestra for his victory. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, the weight of tension lifting like a fog. Each passing second reaffirmed his truth. He had defended not only his property but the spirit of his life's work. Beneath the night sky painted with twinkling stars, Hank walked back to the barn, feeling the sturdy wood beneath his fingertips, a connection both deep and profound. He remembered the long days, the moments filled with laughter shared over meals with his family, the long nights spent fumbling through plans for the season ahead. The barn wasn't just wood and nails. It was a sanctuary, a witness to every triumph and trial that had sculpted him into the man he was. As he leaned against the barn wall, his heart filled with gratitude, he looked up at the cosmos, the vast expanse stretching over him, a reminder that the fight for one's beliefs often takes unexpected forms. His mind wouldn't forget the fear in their eyes when faced with an unwavering spirit, nor would he forget the way he had confronted the danger with the pride of a guardian. In that moment of reflection, Hank understood the profound responsibility of being a steward of the land. It was about more than crops and livestock. It was about legacy and fidelity to ancestral roots. He would continue farm life, sowing seeds into the earth as future generations would be nurtured by the fruits of his labor. As he closed the barn doors, he whispered a silent promise to the land, to every blade of grass and stalk of grain. Tonight, he hadn't just defended his barn. He had declared a fierce commitment to continue thriving against any storm that might come his way. The stillness of the night was more than an embrace. It was a pact with the universe, an understanding that great strength lies within. Through blue skies or dark storms, Hank would rise to face them all, for he was the heart of this land, unyielding and unwavering in the face of adversity. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, but for Hank, the farmer, twilight brought an unsettling chill. He wiped the sweat from his brow as he leaned against the weathered fence that bordered his land. It had been a long day, one of many spent coaxing life from the stubborn soil. But tonight, unease tugged at his gut like a warning bell. It began as a low hum, an engine rumbling in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. Hank squinted, straining to see through the gathering dusk. The roar of a truck broke through the tranquil night, and with it came a gnawing sense of dread. A familiar fear whispered through his mind. Looters. As the truck rounded the bend, 3 figures emerged from the cab, their shadows stretching across the yellowing cornfields like dark omens. Hank's heart raced. He knew that desperation could drive men to do unspeakable things. The barn stood behind him, a fortress built from years of hard work and sacrifice, and in that moment he understood that he had to protect it, no matter the cost. The men stepped out, rough and ragged, their eyes scanning the surroundings with the hunger of scavengers. Hank could hear their laughter, sharp and taunting as they approached the barn. "Look at this old dump," one of them jeered, a sneer twisting his mouth. The air grew thick with tension, every word another weight pressing down on Hank's resolve. He felt a familiar rush of anger. This wasn't just a barn, it was his sanctuary, the repository of his labor, love, and dreams. Memories flickered through his mind. His daughter's laughter echoing as they loaded hay bales, the smell of fresh-cut grass mingling with the sweet scent of summer. Years of sweat and toil were contained within those wooden walls, and it was a life he refused to let them rob him of. Hank pushed off the fence, his boots crunching against the gravel. He moved slowly, deliberately, aware of each footfall as though he were walking on glass. He approached the old hunting rifle hanging near the barn door. Years had passed since he last took it up, each season spent quietly tending to his fields and animals. But tonight he no longer felt like a peaceful farmer, he felt like a guardian. With a swift movement he grabbed the rifle and checked it, an old friend, rusty but reliable. With his back against the barn, he took a breath to steady himself. He raised the rifle, its weight grounding him. He aimed it into the air, letting silence stretch between him and the intruders. Hank shouted, voice booming through the dusk like a clap of thunder. The fearless laughter faltered, surprise washing over the faces that had believed they would stroll through his land without consequence. "What's this old man gonna do?" The leader mocked, but the bravado was thin, trembling on the edge of panic as he stood before the man whose spirit ran deeper than the roots of the crops. Hank knew his eyes sparked with determination. "You think you can just roll in here and take what you want? This barn isn't just wood and nails to me." With every word, he could feel the ground beneath him shift. The men took a step back, glancing at each other, unsure of how to proceed. Did they underestimate him? Did they think an old farmer would back down easily? Hank's heart thundered, but confidence surged within him, pushing him onward. "You don't want to test me," Hank warned, raising the rifle higher, the tension palpable in the warm evening air. The looters hesitated, their bravado cracking like dry paint, revealing uncertainty beneath the fearful surface. The leader barked, but it sounded less certain now. Hank could sense the doubt, the fear creeping in, and he seized the moment. "Try me," he replied, his voice low and edged like a drawn blade. "You think desperation gives you the right to steal from me?" Before he turned to his companions, whispering hastily, perhaps reconsidering their plan. Hank stood firm, muscles coiled and ready, the night air thick with unspoken defiance. Then, without warning, the leader charged, desperation fueling his actions. He yelled, lunging forward as if he was going to take Hank down. But in that split second, Hank raised the rifle and fired a shot into the air. The crack echoed like a cannon, shattering the night's stillness. The looters froze, the sound hanging heavy between them. Every animal on the farm seemed to hold its breath, the air thickening with tension. The leader stumbled back, eyes wide, disoriented by the booming blast. Hank shouted, voice unwavering, the rifle steady in his hands. In that moment, the power dynamic shifted. The looters glanced at each other, uncertainty and fear clashing with their earlier bravado. Hank had put them in their place, but there was no time to relent. He took a careful step forward, drawing a line in the dirt. "This barn is my home. You think you can waltz in here?" Slowly, he watched them back away. With each step, Hank felt the adrenaline coursing through him, but there was also a sharp sense of clarity. He was fighting for more than just wood and nails. He was battling against every harsh whisper of a world that seemed to prey on the fragile. "Come on, let's get out of here," one of them muttered, glancing furtively over his shoulder as the fear eroded the last shreds of their bravado. They hesitated, glancing at each other as if weighing their chances in this unexpected confrontation. The leader barked, his voice cracking under the weight of their fear. They retreated toward the truck, scrambling back into the cab like frightened animals seeking shelter from the storm. Hank lowered his rifle slightly, heart still racing as he watched the truck suddenly roar to life, tires screeching against gravel. They sped away, leaving a plume of dust in their wake, a cloud that hung in the stillness left by their hurried retreat. For a moment, Hank remained rooted to the spot, the rifle heavy but comforting in his grip. He had faced the danger, stared it down with fierce defiance. A wash of relief turned his heart to warmth, spilling over like rain on parched earth. He had defended not just a structure, but years of history, memories intertwined with the land itself. With the advent of calm settling over the fields, he breathed in deeply, letting the cool night air fill his lungs. The stars twinkled overhead, watching the land as they always had, unblinking and wise. In this moment of solitude, a profound understanding washed over him. He was more than a farmer. He was a guardian, a steward of the land, a force to be reckoned with. Hank turned back to the barn, stroking the rough wood, each grain telling stories of perseverance and hope. It stood proud against the night sky, a symbol of his life's work that he would protect fiercely. Every nail and shingle represented his labor, his love, his legacy. As he closed the barn door, the weight of the day settled around him. He knew today's defense was a testament to his spirit, standing tall against the odds. It didn't matter how many looters might come or how many storms might roll through, he would stand his ground. With a quiet resolve, he stepped back into the house, ready to turn in for the night. Despite the chaos, the fear, and uncertainty, he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. He had stood firm, unyielding against aggression, not just for himself, but for the generations that came before him and those yet to come. As he lay in bed, listening to the whisper of the wind against the walls. Hank felt gratitude for the life he had built. He knew tomorrow would come, bringing new challenges and opportunities. But tonight he rested in the knowledge that he had defended not just a barn, but a way of life, a farmer's spirit, ever resilient, ever fierce. With that warmth surrounding him, sleep washed over him, and in the quiet he dreamed of golden fields under a rising sun, where every seed planted bore witness to the battles fought and won. The heart of the land thudded steady, a reminder of resilience that would never fade. In Hank's world, the fight for what was right was always worth every ounce of courage. And no one would ever take that from him. The air was thick with twilight, a heavy blanket wrapped tightly around the old farm, when Hank spotted the headlights cutting through the growing dusk. His heart sank. This wasn't just another peaceful evening. It was a warning, a signal that something was amiss. He had spent a lifetime on this land, pouring everything he had into the soil, the crops, the sturdy barn that had been a silent witness to decades of hard work and late nights. But now, in the fading light, the creeping anxiety twisted in his gut as he watched the truck roll down the dirt road leading to his property. It didn't just have a motor, it had menace. 3 figures spilled out of the vehicle, slouching and moving with a dangerous swagger. They looked rough around the edges, driven by desperation or perhaps just sheer recklessness. Hank took a deep breath and clenched his jaw. He knew what this meant. They were here to take what did not belong to them. It was a sight all too familiar, yet each time felt like a new storm brewing on the horizon. Silent as shadows, the intruders approached the barn, voices rising in laughter that echoed eerily in the stillness. "Look at this place," one of them cackled, pointing toward the weathered structure. Hank felt rage boil up inside him. Did they know what it took to keep this barn standing? How many storms it had weathered, how many dreams were interwoven into its very foundation? Hank slipped into the shadows of the barn, his heart pounding in his chest. This was not just timber and nails. It was a home for his hard work, a safe haven for his livestock, a place filled with memories. He wasn't going to let anyone roll in and rob him of that. Adjusting his grip on the old rifle that hung by the door, he felt a surge of adrenaline. It was an imperfect weapon, maybe rusty and worn, but it had served him well over the years. In a rush, he loaded it, each bullet representing not just protection but the resolve of a man who had faced adversity before and would face it again. He crept to a narrow window, peering out toward the intruders. They were already at the door, testing its strength. Hank's blood ran cold. If they breached the entrance, they would invade not just his physical space but his life, his very being. His heart raced as he prepared himself for the confrontation. "Come on, boys," the leader shouted, the glint of something menacing in his eyes. They pushed against the solid wood of the barn, attempting to pry the door open. Hank could hear the creak of the hinges, a sound that sent his adrenaline into overdrive. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. This was it. He couldn't just stand by and watch them destroy what he had built. The rifle felt heavy in his hands, but he knew he had to act. He shouted, his voice steady but fierce, cutting through the night like a knife. The intruders froze, their laughter dying in an instant, replaced by bewilderment. For a moment they looked like deer caught in headlights, unsure of how to proceed. Hank stepped out from the shadows, rifle aimed and steady, his presence commanding the attention of every man in the clearing. The leader barked, stepping back, surprise flickering across his face. "I'm the farmer who tends to this land, and I won't let you rob me of what's mine," Hank stated, each word firm, resolute, fueled by a lifetime of hard work and sacrifice. The men exchanged wary glances, weighing their options. In that moment, fear and bravado danced in the space between them. They clearly hadn't expected this kind of resistance, and it made them just a little jittery. Hank took a step closer, exuding a quiet strength that radiated from years spent in the fields, shoulder to shoulder with nature. "Listen, old man," the leader sneered, trying to regain control. "You think you can scare us?" With calculated calm, Hank aimed the rifle skyward and fired a loud shot that rang out like thunder, startling the night creatures from their slumber. The echo reverberated through the air, a sound that signaled he meant business. A collective gasp from the intruders shattered the night. They stumbled back, fear now etched in their faces. The leader's bravado faded, replaced by a palpable hesitation. He yelled, attempting to rally his companions, but Hank could see the cracks forming in their facade. When desperation collides with determination, it ignites a spark of resilience Hank knew that all too well. "Outnumbered or not, you don't know me," Hank replied, his voice steady. They hesitated, eyes darting among each other, glancing back at the barn. It was as if the tide of resolve was swinging in Hank's favor, turning the tables in a way they never expected. Fear began to ripple through the group while Hank's heart raced with a fierce pride, the weight of history behind him. This barn was his legacy, and he would defend it fiercely. As they huddled together, considering their next move, Hank sensed their uncertainty, their bravado faltering under the weight of real consequences. One of them muttered, his bravado cracking. "You think just because you have a gun, listen to me," Hank interrupted, voice deep and resonant. "This isn't just a weapon, it's a statement. This is my life, and it's worth fighting for." There it was, the heart of the matter laid bare. Hank wasn't just standing for himself. He embodied every farmer, every laborer, every soul who had poured their life into the land. The men exchanged glances, the cracks in their unity widening, the weight of his words settling over them like a blanket of cold. "Come on, boys, let's just go." "It's not worth it," one of the younger men finally muttered, trembling as he motioned toward the truck. The leader turned, fire sparking in his eyes at the hint of retreat. "Get back here." But Hank remained unwavering, his rifle still aimed, content in the knowledge that courage often shines brightest in the most desperate situations. "You've made your choice," he said calmly. "Leave now and you'll make it home." Hank could see the shift, the subtle fear clinging to the air. The leader stepped hesitantly back, struggling to maintain control over a situation spiraling beyond his grasp. With every backward step they took, Hank felt victory blossom in his chest. He wouldn't let fear dictate his life or his home. "Let's get out of here," the other one shouted, scrambling for the door of the truck. With that, the looters broke ranks, diving into their vehicle in a flurry of panic. The sound of their hasty movements filled the night, accompanied by the growl of the engine revving to life. Tires spun and launched gravel as they tore down the dirt road, fading into the darkness. Breathing a sigh of relief, Hank lowered his rifle, the adrenaline fading as the echoes of the confrontation faded into quiet. He leaned against the barn, heart pounding still, feeling both drained and triumphant. He had stood firm against a force that sought to uproot him, to tear apart what he cherished most. With the stars twinkling above, Hank let the weight of that night wash over him. He had defended his barn, his home, and all the memories contained within its walls. The importance of that moment sank deep, embedding itself in his identity. He had been more than just a man defending his property. He had become the living embodiment of resilience against a world that too often sought to take without giving. Hank turned back to the barn, feeling its solid presence beside him, an old friend that had shared so much over the years. As he walked inside, he took a moment to absorb the warm scent of hay and timber, the very fibers of the structure whispering stories from countless seasons past. "Not today," he murmured to the empty space, as if the barn could hear him. The stillness enveloped him, a comforting embrace, and Hank felt the pang of gratitude for his life, for the land, and for the quiet strength he had found within himself. Tomorrow the sun would rise, and though he knew that challenges lay ahead, he was ready to face them all. The fight was never truly over. It was a part of his identity, a current that flowed beneath the surface. Every furrow on his brow, every gray hair on his head was a badge of honor in an ongoing struggle. As he prepared for bed that night, he thought of the generations who had farmed this land before him, who had stood against their own challenges, echoing a timeless spirit of resilience that would never fade. He lay down, exhaustion creeping into his bones, but a quiet fire of determination burned within him. Sleep came easily, filled with dreams of golden fields and sunlit mornings. The barn stood watch every night, a sentinel of hope and strength, a testament to hard work, sacrifice, and an unbreakable bond with the land. And as the stars twinkled above, Hank knew this was not just a victory against looters. It was a promise that he would continue to fight for what mattered, defending heart and home come what may. The farm was his legacy, his life, and he would cherish it fiercely. In that solitude, he found not just peace, but purpose, a commitment to weather whatever storms lay ahead. In the depths of the night, the heart of the farmer beat strong, steady, and unyielding. The air hung heavy with anticipation, silence enveloping the farm as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields. Hank, an old farmer with hands weathered from years of hard labor, leaned against the fence. He loved this land, every inch of it, from the soil that birthed the crops to the barn that stood proudly against the backdrop of the twilight sky. But as night descended, a low rumble in the distance broke the stillness. Hank straightened, his heart beginning to race as he squinted toward the sound. A truck. He could hear the engine muffled against the cooling breeze, growing closer, more ominous. The tales of looters had been circulating through town like wildfire, stories of desperate men willing to take what didn't belong to them. Hank had always brushed them off, secure in the belief that his little piece of paradise would remain untouched. But as the headlights cut through the gathering darkness, he felt that sense of security slip away. 3 figures emerged from the truck, their movements brimming with a sense of entitlement. Laughter echoed through the air, their cruel words striking Hank like a physical blow. "Look at this place," one of them shouted, tossing his head back with laughter. Anger surged within Hank, as primal as the earth beneath his feet. How dare they laugh at his home, at his life's work? The barn stood behind him, a fortress built from his blood, sweat, and tears. Memories flooded his mind. 1,000 early mornings, his daughter's laughter as they played in the hay, the ache of hard days followed by the warmth of a fire. These outsiders did not understand the history woven into the very walls of that barn, nor the legacy he had fought to build. With a slow, deliberate motion, Hank set his jaw and moved quietly toward the barn. His heart pounded. What would he do? He couldn't just stand by and let them take what was his. He grabbed his old rifle from its resting place on the wall. It was a relic from another time, but it had always been reliable, just like him. He checked it hastily, loading it with shaking hands, and moved toward the door. Adrenaline coursed through him, sharpening his senses and heightening his resolve. "Hey," one of the looters called, swaggering towards the barn like he owned the place. Hank's blood boiled. These men thought they could take everything without consequence. They thought they could prey on those who worked hard for a living. He stepped out, nestled just inside the doorway, and aimed the rifle at the air, ready to defend his territory. His voice thundered across the night like a shot, reverberating against the silence. The looters froze, momentarily disoriented. The leader sneered, taking a hesitant step back. It was brave talk, but even he couldn't completely disguise the fear creeping into his eyes. "I'm the man who's going to make you regret ever stepping foot on this property," Hank replied, his voice low and fierce. The looters exchanged wary glances, the bravado faltering as uncertainty seeped into their group. Hank felt the power shift. Fear was flaring, and he could see its reflection in their eyes. He took a step forward, lifting the rifle slightly, not quite aiming but making his point clear. "You think this barn is just an old shack? This is my legacy." Another voice quivered from the back, filled with doubt. "Come on, man, we don't need to do this." The leader snapped, cutting him off, anger laced with uncertainty. There was a crack in their facade. Their bravado was peeling away like paint from an old fence. "I'm not afraid of you," Hank declared, aware that he stood alone but feeling emboldened by a lifetime of hard work and honed instincts. He sensed a turning tide, the primal urge to protect overriding any flicker of fear. The leader retorted, trying to regain control, though his voice lacked conviction. "Regret is what you'll feel if you try to take anything," Hank fired back, gripping the rifle tightly as sweat trickled down his brow. He raised it slightly, catching the glint of moonlight on the barrel. The men stepped back, their confidence rattled. Moments stretched and twisted, the tension igniting the air around them. Hank's heart raced, and he knew he had them on the ropes. This was no longer a game for them, it was survival. The realization buzzed in their eyes, electricity cracking through the night. The youngest of the group pleaded, his voice shaky. It was the first crack of fear, a fracture that Hank recognized all too well. The leader hesitated, clearly conflicted. Hank took another step forward, his voice steady. "This is your chance." The leader shot back, but uncertainty laced his words. He shifted his weight, glancing at his companions, possibly calculating their odds. Just then, one of the looters turned on his heel, bolting back towards their truck. It was as if a dam had burst. Seeing the escape spurred the others into action, panic spreading like wildfire among them. "Get in the truck!" they yelled, scrambling to retreat. Hank's heart soared as he watched them dart away, fear propelling them like a storm. They leapt into the truck, doors slamming shut, tires spinning wildly as they tore down the dirt road, leaving nothing but a cloud of dust behind. He stood there, rifle still at the ready, breath coming in heavy heaves. Alone in the silence that followed, the realization of what had just happened began to seep in. He had protected his home, defended the blood and sweat that had been poured into that barn. Relief washed over him, wave after wave, mingling with triumph and disbelief. Hank lowered the rifle, feeling the weight lift off his shoulders. The barn stood solid behind him, surrounded by the eerie stillness of night, each beam and post a silent sentinel to his struggles. He walked slowly back toward it, every step a reminder of the battle fought, not just against intruders, but for the very essence of who he was. Inside the barn, the air was warm and familiar, filled with the sense of hay and earth. Memories flooded in a mosaic of laughter, hard work, and love. Each board seemed to whisper stories of perseverance, of love, of resilience. It was in that moment Hank realized that he had defended more than just a physical structure. He had defended a way of life that ran deeper than blood, rooted in generations past. Sinking his hands into the rough wood of the barn, he felt a surge of gratitude. He wouldn't let anyone dictate his fate. He had fought for it. As he leaned against the wall, memories washed over him. His father standing there, sharing tales under the stars, his daughter laughing while helping him with chores. Tonight had tested him, pushing him to the edge. But in that moment of crisis, he had found strength in his roots, an identity forged in adversity, his spirit intertwined with this land. He took a moment to gather himself, breathing in the air heavy with nostalgia. As the night deepened around him, he cast one last glance out the barn door, scanning the night. There were no more headlights illuminating the dirt road. The danger had passed, but deep within him stirred an awareness, a recognition of just how fragile life could be, and yet how fiercely it could be defended. Lying down that night, Hank felt a sense of peace settle in. The barn cradled him in its embrace, and he could almost hear its heartbeat, an echo of his own. Sleep enveloped him, a reprieve from the struggles that awaited. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on, unyielding and strong. The stars twinkled outside, the universe bearing witness to his defiance. He understood that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles, but he was ready. He had bravely defended his home, and that sense of victory painted the darkness with determination. For Hank, the fight would never truly be over. The soil under his feet told the stories of every farmer who had come before him, and he would continue their legacy, rising to face whatever storms came his way. He was not just a farmer, he was a protector of his world, and he would defend it fiercely, with every ounce of strength he had. And when morning light broke over the horizon, illuminating the barn with golden rays, Hank woke with purpose brimming in his chest. Today would be a good day. He would tend to the land, nurture what he had fought for, and remember that the heart of a farmer beats strong, unbreakable, and steadfast. The fight for one's home is a deeply ingrained instinct, and in that moment, Hank knew he was on the right path, a path paved with courage and protected by an unwavering spirit. Thunder roared in the distance as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting an eerie glow across the fields. Hank stood at the edge of his property, the scent of wet earth filling the air, and something about the stillness made the hair on the back of his neck rise. The tranquility he had cherished all day had evaporated, replaced by a sense of impending danger. Just then he heard it, a low rumble growing louder, unmistakably a vehicle making its way down the dirt road leading to his farm. It wasn't unusual for cars to pass this way, but something about the sound sent a jolt of tension through his body. As it approached, he squinted against the fading light and his heart sunk. A rusted pickup truck, battered and worn, pulled into view, an unwelcome sight. Out of the truck poured three figures, their silhouettes stark against the backdrop of his beloved barn. They moved with a swagger that screamed trouble, their laughter slicing through the evening calm like a knife. Hank could feel his pulse quicken. Something in their demeanor told him they were more than just passing tourists. These men had hunger in their eyes. Their intent was unmistakable. One of them shouted, pointing toward the barn, the sneer on his face sending a wave of anger crashing over Hank. Did they think his life's work was a joke? Each beam of that barn was a testimony to years of sweat and sacrifice. Hank's fists clenched as he stepped closer to the barn, his heart hammering in his chest. He knew he had to protect what was his. He turned to the old hunting rifle hanging by the door, its wood smooth beneath his fingers, a relic from 2 generations ago. It had begun to feel like a part of him, his father's trusty weapon imbued with a legacy of protecting their land. He loaded it with care, adrenaline surging through him, sharpening his senses. Hank called out, his voice steady but fierce, echoing across the field. The intruders halted, surprise washing over their faces. For just a moment they stalled, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. Hank seized the opportunity, stepping out into the open, hand firmly gripping the rifle. "You have no right here." "Oh, really?" The leader spat with a mock laugh, but his bravado faltered. Hank's heart raced. He could see the doubt creeping in. Behind the bravado, he recognized the fear of vulnerable men facing someone who wasn't afraid to stand his ground. "This isn't just a barn," Hank stated, his voice strong and clear, cutting through the fears and doubts. "This is my life." The leader shifted uncomfortably, his bravado now hanging by a thread. Hank knew in that moment he had to push. "You think you can just roll up and take what you want? You're mistaken." The other 2 looters, glancing nervously at each other, were beginning to waver. Hank saw it, the flicker of fear overshadowing their initial bravado. The air grew heavy with tension, as if the night itself held its breath. One of the men shouted, but his voice broke, and it was clear that confidence was leaking from their party. "Take a look," Hank replied, raising the rifle slightly, making his point crystal clear. Every muscle in his body tensed. The stakes were high, and he knew it. Real-life battles often hinge on moments like this, when fear is pitted against bravado. Hank sensed their uncertainty coiling in the air around them. Just then, one looter took a step back, visibly shaken, as if realizing that the stakes were too high. "We didn't mean to," he began, faltering mid-sentence. "I suggest you leave before things turn very bad for you," Hank warned, his voice low and sharp like a blade. The men hesitated, glancing back and forth, weighing their options. Hank could see their bravado draining away with every passing second. A twinge of panic crept into the leader's voice. He swung back, attempting to regain control, but it came out shaky, revealing their fear. "I would run while you still can. Trust me, you don't want to find out what I'm capable of," Hank said, cementing his stance, his grip shifting slightly on the rifle. Then a distant echo of thunder rumbled and something shifted. With the weight of the gun in his hands, Hank felt a shield of determination wrapping around him like a cloak. The looters glanced at each other, fear breaking their previously confident demeanor further apart. One of the younger looters suddenly yelled, breaking ranks, his courage cracking under the pressure, as panic flickered through the group like wildfire. They turned to run, scrambling back to their rusted pickup, hearts pounding with the reality of their foolish game. Hank lowered the rifle, exhaling as they dove inside, slamming the doors shut. The leader shouted, mumbling angrily as the truck roared back to life, tires screeching against the gravel as they peeled away from the barn, leaving behind a trail of dust and regret. The night grew quiet again, the tempest of voices and chaos fading into the wind. Hank stood there, rifle still raised but slowly lowering it as the adrenaline began to ebb. The echo of the confrontation pulsed through him. He couldn't believe what had just happened. He had defended not just his property but his very identity as a farmer, a protector of his land. A weight lifted from his shoulders, relief flooding his body as he took a deep breath, letting the fresh air fill his lungs. Every heartbeat resonated with the thrill of victory, and he felt the pride welling up inside him. He hadn't just stood up for a barn. He had stood up for every ounce of labor and love he had poured into this place. Turning back toward the barn, he felt rejuvenated. Each beam, each wooden board whispered back to him, a language he understood deeply. This was his home, the place where he had raised his family, where laughter echoed, where hard work met the rewards of a bountiful harvest. As he stepped inside, the familiar smells of hay and earth enveloped him like an old friend. In that moment, he could almost hear the ghosts of his father and grandfather, their wisdom interwoven with the very structure of the barn. They had faced their challenges, and now it was his turn to honor that legacy. Hank placed the rifle down and looked around, letting the memories wash over him. Each corner of this barn held stories of resilience. There were the long days of plowing fields, the evenings spent mending fences, and the countless moments of joy shared over bountiful meals. This barn had been his fortress against the struggles of the world, and would continue to be. As the stars twinkled outside, the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in soft pastels, though Hank stayed awake long into the night, contemplating what had just unfolded. He reflected on the essence of what it meant to fight for something, to not only defend a structure but an entire way of life, to cultivate something deeply rooted in tradition and toil turned into fierce protection at that very moment. Sleep didn't come easy, but in the stillness of the farm, he felt a growing sense of purpose. He wouldn't cower in fear but would embrace the challenge life threw at him, standing firm against anyone who thought they could take what was rightfully his. He understood now more than ever that the spirit of a farmer could be indomitable. Meanwhile, as the sun began to rise, its golden rays spilling over the fields, he felt rejuvenated. The day stretched before him, not just a canvas waiting to be filled, but an opportunity to reclaim the narrative of his life. The barn stood unwavering in the light, a testament that he would gather strength from those who had come before him, continuing the lineage of labor and love. Tomorrow held promise. His crops would grow, the animals would thrive, and he would stand vigilant, ready to defend not just his barn but his life's work. This was more than simple land. It was his heritage, the embodiment of everything he had accomplished and everything he would continue to build. As Hank stepped out into the morning light, every ounce of adrenaline from that night melted away, replaced by a kindling passion for life, the determination to nurture, protect, and defy. The barn, under the soft sunlight, glimmered with pride. It would always be his refuge, standing firm against any storm just like him. With every new dawn, Hank understood that it wasn't just about a man against the world. It was about a man fiercely defending what he held dear: his land, his legacy, and the spirit of every farmer who had walked before him. Today was simply another chapter in an ongoing story, and Hank intended to write it boldly. Rain had just begun to patter against the roof of the barn, a soothing rhythm that echoed in the quiet countryside. But beneath that soft percussion, the stillness of the evening was shattered when the roar of an engine sliced through the air. Hank, a farmer weathered by years of hard work and sleepless nights, stepped out into the dim light to investigate. He squinted against the shadows as a beat-up truck rumbled down the dirt road leading to his farm. The headlights cut through the wet darkness, illuminating the paths he had trodden since he was a boy. But tonight, something was different. Gut instinct kicked in, a creeping unease gnawing at him something wicked was afoot. 3 figures climbed out of the cab, their movements aggressive and unrestrained. Hank's heart raced as he observed their swagger, each of them radiating a sense of entitlement. They were here not to admire the beauty of the landscape, but to scavenge it. "Look at this dump," one man called, grinning wickedly. The laughter that followed sent a shiver down Hank's spine. His land wasn't a playground for thieves. It was his lifeblood, a testament to years of toil and sweat. The barn behind him stood as a fortress filled with memories, the heart of his existence. Clenching his fists, he turned toward the barn, the wooden structure looming behind him like a guardian. He could feel its solidity grounding him, and he marched inside to grasp the old hunting rifle that hung on the wall, a tool of protection passed down from his father. Each bullet he put into the chamber was not just a warning, it was a promise to defend what was his. "Hey, you over there," Hank shouted, voice steady despite the rising tide of adrenaline. The looters froze, surprise flickering across their faces. That moment of uncertainty was all he needed. Hank stepped into the light, the rifle raised slightly, letting it reflect in the fading glow. One of the men laughed nervously, eyes glancing back and forth, the bravado fading. "What's this old man gonna do?" he mocked, but there was a tremor in his voice that didn't escape Hank's attention. "It's not a stick," Hank replied, his voice deep and resonant as he aimed it higher, fingers tense around the wooden grip. "This is a warning." Fear trickled into the leader's bravado, and for the first time, Hank saw doubt flicker in their eyes. The weight of their mistake pressed down on them like the dark clouds overhead. As the rain began to fall heavier, that doubt turned into a chorus of uncertainty. "Let's just grab a few things and be on our way," one of the looters suggested, but his voice trembled. Hank could see that they hadn't come prepared for a confrontation like this. They thought they could intimidate him and steal the fruits of his labor without backlash. They were wrong. Hank barked, stepping forward, his heart hammering in time with the raindrops now pelting the barn. "You don't know who you're dealing with. This barn is more than wood and nails. It's my life's work. You think you can come in here and take what you want?" With every word, the looters visibly shrank under his commanding presence. He watched as the leader clenched his fists, searching for a way to reclaim control, but Hank felt a surge of power rushing through him. It wasn't just a gun he had in his hands. It was the spirit of every farmer who had stood resilient against overwhelming odds. One of the younger looters pleaded, his voice breaking. Genuine fear crept into their dynamic now, the facade of toughness dissolving like morning mist. Nobody wanted to confront a force they couldn't see. Fear is often a greater weapon than any gun. Hank understood this instinctively. He shouted, the storm rolling overhead mirroring the turmoil brewing in the faces of the intruders. Suddenly, the leader charged forward, fueled by panic. He screamed, his bravado crumbling as Hank raised the rifle. The air crackled with adrenaline, and time seemed to slow. That's when Hank fired. A deafening shot erupted, echoing into the night as the bullet soared into the air above them. The sound sent tremors through the earth, startling the looters into silence. Expectation, dread, and confusion mingled in the air, all hanging there as if time had paused. The looters recoiled, shock overtaking bravado. They stumbled backward, eyes wide with realization. The leader's anger was instantly replaced by a look of pure terror. Hank shouted, his voice piercing through the darkness with authority. Their resolve shattered, and in a flurry of recklessness, they scrambled for the truck. Hank could see the fear etched across their faces as they climbed back inside, a desperate energy surging through them. Tires spun, gravel kicked up, and they roared away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Breathing heavily, Hank lowered his rifle, his heart still pounding in his chest. The adrenaline flooded his system, and he stared at the darkening road, where the truck had disappeared into the night. Victory coursed through his veins, mixed with disbelief. He had defended not just the barn, but a way of life where hard work refused to be undermined. He stepped back inside the barn, letting the door close behind him. What just happened? Not just a battle against thieves, but a challenge to his spirit sank in deeper than any blade could pierce. The smell of hay mixed with the scent of wet wood, wrapping around him like the embrace of old memories. He felt invincible, a protector of his land, a warrior of the soil. Outside, the rain began to pour heavily, drumming a rhythmic tattoo against the roof. As he leaned against the barn, he realized that the danger might have passed, but lurking out there, who knew what else awaited? His instincts told him they wouldn't be gone for long. Fear and desperation can drive even the most timid to madness. Just then, a flash of lightning illuminated the night for a brief instant, painting sharp shadows against the walls within. Hank felt a shiver run up his spine. He gripped the rifle tightly, knowing full well that he had won a battle, but the war could still rage on. He stepped back outside, scanning the empty fields, trying to shake the lingering unease. Thunder rumbled in the distance, almost like an omen, and he could feel his heart sinking with the merciless storm above. Every gust of wind in the trees carried a whisper of warning. As he turned back toward the barn, a movement caught his attention. Just beyond the fence, 3 shadowy figures emerged from the depths of the tree's dark shapes, creeping closer, emboldened by the chaos. They had returned. Panic gripped Hank as the realization set in. The initial looters had brought their friends. They had come back not for simple theft, but for vengeance. Heart racing, he raised the rifle once more, fury and fear intertwining in his chest. He warned, voice ringing with intensity, but the figures only laughed, a cruel sound that cut through the storm. They were relentless, seeking retribution for their earlier humiliation. One of them took a step forward, brandishing something metal. Was it a weapon? Hank's breath quickened. The tide of fear morphed into something more fierce. This was no longer just about defending his barn. It was now about survival in the face of violent disregard. Hank shouted, but they came closer. His finger trembled by the trigger as the shadows advanced. This was the moment that would define him, a battle between one man and an onslaught of chaos. With the storm raging above him, his spirit clashed with theirs. In that moment, he understood that the fight was far from over, and he was ready to face whatever came next, even as the waves of darkness rolled toward him. The storm brewed further, the looters advancing, and even as thunder roared, the real battle was just beginning. Hank tightened his grip on the rifle, filled with a defiant rage that burned bright as the lightning flashing overhead. The struggle of the farmer against the shadows of the night was just getting started, and the outcome remained uncertain. Would he be able to stand his ground once again? Would valor triumph over chaos on this stormy night? The answers hung in the air, heavy with tension.